In this tutorial, I will show you how to set up a lighting effect by changing an object's material glow. If you're going to be using lots of lights in your game, then this is a more efficient way to create a similar effect, as Sandbox is only able to support up to 32 lights. First, I will show you how to set up multiple triggers to turn on a single light. Then I will show you how to set up multiple triggers whereby each one is attached to its own light. I've already set up my scene with the object that I wish to use as my light, the lantern here. Now I need to get a trigger. So go over to Entity, Triggers, Proximity Trigger, and drag it into the world. Call your trigger something easily identifiable. So I'm going to call it Lantern Trigger and enter. Then I'm going to change the dimensions. So I'm going to make my X 20, my Y 10, my Z 5. Then I'm going to use the Move tool key and just make sure it's lined up correctly. If you're going to have several triggers turn on a single light, then it's essential to put your flow graph on the entity which is to be copied. In this case, it's the trigger. If you're going to have multiple lights, then you would need to put the flow graph on your object you wish to act as your light. We're having multiple triggers, so we're going to put it on our trigger. So scroll down, go flow graph create, give your flow graph a new name. I'm going to call mine Lantern Glow. OK. Now we have the space for our new flow graph. So to start the flow graph off, we need a start node. So right click, add node, miscellaneous start. Then we need to get a default parameter for our object. So right click, add node, entity, material parameter. It's asking us to choose the entity we wish to make glow. So click on your object, come back and then right click over choose entity and assign selected entity. Next we need to collect our trigger. So as it's the item we have our flow graph on, we can just right click and say add graph entity. And then we need another copy of our material parameter. So click on your material parameter, Control C, Control V. Now we're going to connect these up. So from the start, we're going to get our default material. So from output to get, click on your material parameter. Over here we have our parameter float, which is where we put in what we're changing. So click on that. You'll see a small box button appear. The first time you click on this, you'll be given 5 options. They are alpha, ambient multiplier, glow, opacity and shininess. There's a glitch in the system, so you'll only get to do this once, so it's best if you have a pen ready and write it down for future reference. If I click on mine, I just get this error because I've already done it, so just click OK and then you'll have to type what you want to change in here. So mine's glow. As this is the default, we'll just leave the value at 0. So from the start, we're going to enable our proximity trigger. Then when we enter our trigger, we're going to get our new material parameter. And while we're inside it, we're going to change the value float. Click on your material parameter, go over to parameter float, type in glow again. And then this time our float is going to be 10. And enter. So there's your finished flow graph. So now we're going to copy our trigger multiple times. So click on your trigger. I'm going to zoom out a bit. So click on your trigger and then click on the axes you wish to copy along. This is going to be the y-axis for me. I'll go Control C, Control V, and then it will slide along easily. Control C, Control V. So there we have our 3 triggers and our lantern. Now we're ready to test it. So jump into your game. So there's our light. entering the first trigger area. So there's our light entering the first trigger area. The light goes on, off, second trigger area, on, off, and last trigger area. Now we're going to copy our trigger and our lantern to multiple locations so that each trigger has its own lantern, and we'll turn it on when the player enters. So it's best to link your trigger with your lantern, so click on your trigger on the right hand side here, go down, and under Entity Links say Pick Target. So I'm going to pick my lantern. As my light has two parts to it, I'm going to pick both parts, and there you can see both parts are in the entity links. Now it's going to be easier to copy. So now you need to make sure you pick your object and as well as your trigger. Hold the Control key down to select them all, then click on the axis that you want to copy along and go Control C, Control V, and it copies along nicely. And one more time. Now we're ready to go in and test the area. So there we have our lanterns running into the first area. This light turns on, the others remain off. Into the second area, that lantern turns on, and the others are off. And the final area, the light turns on. So I hope you found this useful, and this gives you inspiration to find new ways of creating great lighting effects.